us this afternoon. It's always great to be the panel right after lunch, so try to make this a little livelier so there's no sleep apnea setting in or anything. I wanted to first start off with each of my illustrious panelists giving a brief overview of their backgrounds. I myself am a general partner at Accelerate Capital. Earlier this month, actually 5 days ago or 6 days ago or 7 days ago now, we changed our name to Smart Lab. So my team was very specific that I needed to make that plug. So we invest in early to mid-stage life science companies. We tend to focus on 5 therapeutic areas: hematology, immunology, infectious diseases, oncology represent the largest portion of it. We're based in Boston, and I've been doing this now for 27 years, and I'm honored to be here.
Hello. My name is Brent Ahrens. I guess that is a good enough wake up after lunch. Brent Ahrens, one of the partners at Canaan Partners. We are a 31 plus year old firm. Offices East Coast and West Coast. I'm based here in Menlo Park, based in the city as well. And we do a mix of life sciences investing as well as tech. Tech is typical stuff you think of here in Silicon Valley. And the life sciences area is majority biotech or therapeutics, biopharm, different words used interchangeably, as well as some medical devices, occasionally diagnostics and digital health, but mainstay is biopharm. I've been with the firm almost 21 years by now.
Chris Schubert, Head of External Innovation at Servier. For those of you who don't know, and probably that might be a few of them, given that we are relatively unknown in the US still. So Servier is France's largest privately held biopharma company. We have an interesting governance structure in the sense that we are a set of for-profit companies governed by a non-profit foundation, so we have actually no shareholder. As such, we are very R&D heavy. We spend on an annual basis about 25 to 30% of our revenues, which are now close to $5 billion US back into R&D. We're active in 5 therapeutic areas. Oncology primarily, cardiovascular, metabolic, immune inflammation, and CNS. I think the reason why I'm on the early stage panel is because, as a mid-sized pharma, we actually do get in the game very, very early. If you look at the deals we've done, the 70 plus alliances we have, established over the last 10 years at Servier, a lot of them have come very, very early, 4 to 5 years from an IND, and I think that is really where our sweet spot is.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Mendoza, and I'm with Bayer. I've been with Bayer for about 10 years in their partnering and external innovation group. And Bayer Pharmaceuticals is focused on oncology diseases, cardiovascular diseases, developing therapeutics for those primary indications. We also work in ophthalmology and in hemostatic disorders. In fact, the Bay Area is sort of the hub of our biotech business. Across the Bay in Berkeley, we have our Factor VIII replacement therapy production facility where we make 3 different products. Excuse me.
I'm Chef Kindler. I'm venture partner at Therapeutics Ventures. So we are focused on orphan diseases at the moment. For myself, I would like the scientific abilities guide, not as much as financial.
Great, thank you. So first things first, if anything has shocked me in the past 12 months, more than our current administration, is the definition of what is an early stage company. When I started in this industry back in 2001, I was at a firm called Essex Woodlands, and when we talked about an early stage venture investment, we were talking about a company that may have raised $10 million in a Series A, was definitely in phase 1, possibly going into phase 2 clinical trials. That, by our definition, was quote unquote early stage. We define translational research as translating from the clinic to bedside. So I wanted to ask my colleagues here, as potential targets for investment in the audience, how do each of you define your early stage focus? What are some of the things, profile characteristics, either in terms of balance sheet, in terms of R&D advances, that you'd like to see from your potential targets? Maybe we'll start with Brent, with your career at Canaan and how that has changed as well for your fund.
Yeah, it definitely changed, akin to what you mentioned a minute ago, Andrew. I think how we would define it today is driven as much by, if I think about a typical, is this a largely biotech crowd? Okay, good, all right. Lots of heads going this way, heads going this way. Simplistically, and so my background, me, mechanical engineer, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek because my biology and chemistry experience is much more limited relative to many others, certainly in the room. But simplistically, you have to have a couple things, right? What's the target? What are you going after in the body? And how are you going about that? Is it a small molecule, antibody, peptide, whatever the therapy happens to be? To me, early is, if you don't know either one of those things, it may be an interesting potential target to go after, and you have no idea what the chemistry is going to be. So that would be super early. We tend to invest when companies are probably anywhere from 18 to maybe 36 months before the clinic. Generally speaking, there's some target validation that's out there based on a number of assays, usually academic work. So I think that kind of in a nutshell defines it. But let me just give an interesting, perhaps odd example of two Series A companies. I assume everybody's familiar with sort of the Series A, B kind of notion. I had two Series A companies, both in the same space, meaning antibiotics. Both were gram-positive antibiotics, so even a little bit more narrow. One of them was about 12 months from going into the clinic. The other one already had 3,000 patients worth of data. So not all, quote, early stage investments are created equal. The first one was a license from a Japanese pharmaceutical company. The second was a spin-out from Pfizer. And so beauty's in the eye of the beholder is part of the message as well. And you may call it early, next person calls it late. I'll show one other anecdote. I met with an entrepreneur just a week and a half or so ago. And I hadn't touched base with him in probably 3 or 4 years, and he's still working, plugging away in the same company to his credit. Last time I talked to him was, years ago. And he said, "Oh, you're doing late stage investing." And I said, "Well, how far are you from the clinic?" "Oh, probably 6 or 8 years." I said, "You call that late stage? And then how many years to get to the market?" I said, "I think that's still pretty early." He said, "Yeah, I guess you're right." So beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I think about target and what's your technology to go after that target.
No, I think I would agree with that. I think it's we think about it, simplistically. I think there's early clinical development, which is one sense of early innovation. I think, which is a vastly different lens, around translational science and translational medicine than there is on the preclinical side. But I think it's, as we are a very research-heavy organization, what we consider early really is after target validation, right? So I think we would expect at least some level of target validation. Now that can be a very simplistic, cell-based in vitro assay, right? It can be an in vivo model. But for us, it's really, pre-IND enabling studies is what I would say we call early, right? So anywhere from post-target validation to, let's say, 12 to 15 months or 12 to 18 months from IND, I think is the space where what we consider early, and depending again on the disease areas, I think the requirements to go from early to more advanced, will depend a bit on the target, the mechanism, the disease area, the models available, the translatability. But I think that's really, on the research side is what we would consider early.
You raise a great point there. I had been speaking about therapeutics in nature, or in general rather, but how does that change when you think about devices as well? I mean, to the extent that you would invest in a device, like for example myself, if something is pursuing a 510K approval process, I'm looking for a prototype. I want to see the prototype, for example. So I'm just curious, not just you, Christian, but our other colleagues, as you think about device investments or opportunities, how does that change your perspective with respect to early, quote unquote, types of opportunities?
No, I would say, we're agnostic. Yes, we're therapeutics focused. We're agnostic of modality. I think we are as interested in delivery and devices as we are, in traditional therapeutics. And we have a big digital health and e-health division called Servier eHealth. I would say what we would consider early is really around the devices, much more around the clinical side, right? It's pre-proof of concept clinically, right? There's nothing for us on the device side is early. So in that sense, it's pretty defined, actually.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, at Bayer, I would certainly echo what my colleagues have just said in terms of early stage, but I think one of the areas where we've focused a little more of our efforts in maybe the last 5 to 10 years is really looking even pre-validation, looking to partner with academic institutions and develop, focused in a particular therapeutic area, develop a portfolio of projects. So for example, we started out with an alliance with the German Cancer Research Center about 10 years ago. That started out with a small portfolio of projects where the goal was really to validate targets that we could then, together with them, and then move them into preclinical development and discovery of the therapeutics at Bayer. And that collaboration has evolved into something where we now have projects that have come out of that collaboration that are in clinical development. We've established joint labs with them, so the relationship is much closer, and we continue to develop new therapies together. And we've taken that model and then translated that into similar collaborations focused in different areas that Bayer is strategically interested in with other academic centers. For example, the Broad Institute, we have a multi-year, multi-project collaboration focused again on oncogenomics, but also on cardiogenomics, looking particularly at our cardiovascular area of interest. And then with Vanderbilt, most recently, we signed a collaboration. We have a portfolio of projects focused on kidney diseases, and we're looking to do more of those with other research centers. So that's pretty early. I mean, we're partnering with these academic centers. We have alliance management committed to oversee the relationship, and there's alliance management both on the Bayer side as well as the partner side to ensure that the relationship moves forward and the communication moves forward, and that we hit the milestones that we're out for. And there's an overall governance structure, so I think that's even pre-validation, where there's a good rationale, but perhaps we don't have validation yet. We generate that in the context of the relationship that we have with the academic centers, because typically they're coming up with the targets. They have in vivo models in place that they run, and so the drug discovery we can do once the target's validated in our labs and work collaboratively with them. But really, there's a sort of a joint ownership in moving those projects along the discovery and development value chain. And to your point, to your question around devices, Bayer really isn't in that business. I can't speak to that.
Please.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, the target validation is important, the chemistry. And I also echo, at least for part of this, is that there must be a clear path to the clinic. So technology should be that far that you have a clear path into the clinic and basically ready for IND studies, final pharmacology validation studies, so that you can really be in the clinic in 12 to 18 months. Something that perhaps I can add is that when we look at opportunities, then it would also be very helpful if you could establish PD markers or something like that, so that you can, when you get into the clinic, that you can really also get a validation, not of target engagement, which has been a lot of focus on, but also on the disease characteristics.
That's great. Thank you. I'm taking notes as you speak because it reminds me of some things. So with regard to search and evaluation now, once you've kind of identified kind of an overall benchmark of what you're looking for in terms of stage of development, and I'm going to start off with you, Chef, on this one, and then move to Brent, and then our colleagues on the corporate venture side. what are some of the, when it comes to search and evaluation, what are some of the criteria that you look for as something that is critical in your decision-making process to make it go forward investment? And I compare what you gentlemen are going to say, and I particularly know Kane and Partners, I'm comparing that to my colleagues at Third Rock, Polaris, and Atlas, not to make light of what they're doing, but they are fundamentally in licensing R&D from a lab and building their company within their own house, where when I came into the venture industry more than a year ago, we invested in both the horse and the jockey. The leadership team, the cohesiveness of that team was a critical part of our decision-making process. So, and the time they've spent together. So I'd love to get your perspectives, first from the venture side and then from the corporate venture side as well, please.
Yeah, in principle, I think it can be both. I think if you have a really good team, you can take bigger risks in the technology. So if you're really gonna go get it into with an external team, or that it's more like an in-licensing model, then it should be really a clear-cut technology or product. You were talking earlier about not proof of concept, but the prototype. Yeah, so that's what you want to have, a prototype, because usually there are a lot of things in products and techniques, at least that's what I found, that are just not written down, and you need people who have worked for that, on that. So that part can both answer that question. What would be critical to us? I think what's also critical is the CMC issue, and I think that's often forgotten. We talked about the earlier, it's about target validation, the animal models, and look how great it is. It's really translatable to humans and patients, and obviously there's a big patient need. But what is often is the CMC part, and the delivery, which we found is often a hurdle, or at least neglected in the plans that are presented.
Can you talk, when you say CMC, just so that we're all talking from the same playbook, can you describe that a little bit more and break out the acronym?
Well, okay, so basically, can you produce it, and can it be produced in sufficient quantities? Because if you go from the lab to toxicology studies to human studies, you need 10-100-fold higher amounts of compound. So that needs to be produced, that needs to be under control, but also the formulation is something different than dissolving it in the test tube or something like that, compared to having a delivery into humans. So often data are very compelling, at least are very compellingly presented. But I found that's often neglected, and that's an area of focus that we tend to get into to the bottom, to make sure that we have that clear path into the clinic, and we don't get surprises on that. Because in general, if we are talking about we want to be in 12 months or 18 months into the clinic, I found that process is actually often the hurdle to get into the clinic.
Great, please.
There's a popular, very short expression, +1. I'm sure everybody's heard that one. It seems like it floats around a lot of our emails. So I would say +1 to what Chef said, all those things. Team matters first and foremost by a long shot. And it's interesting how that element is replete as we think through the next layer of things that are important. It is the CMC, it's the clinical development plan, et cetera, et cetera. You all don't want to hear this as entrepreneurs, and this isn't how we as VCs intended, but it's all a test. it's a test both ways. You guys are testing us, hey, do I like these guys? And do they seem like they get it? And they're understanding of my business and digging in and helping to improve the plan and the work product here. And it's a test of you guys as well in terms of how robust is this plan? How committed are you to doing this thing? Because nothing's broken today. You push a rock up the hill every single day as an entrepreneur. It's really hard. So we want to make sure that those pieces all fit together. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to go according to plan. It's going to be over budget. It's guaranteed it's going to take longer. These are like my home remodeling projects on occasion. Guarantee it's going to take you longer. Guarantee it's going to cost you more money. That's the nature of the beast. But you still want to look at those major buckets: CMC, clinical path, what's the regulatory strategy, the target validation, all those sorts of things. It has to hang together. And one of those things that's sort of, if you think of a curtain or tapestry or something like that, that's the backdrop. You've got this thing called the plan. Does the plan make sense? I need X millions of dollars to get to this proof point along the way. Okay, that's backable. Those are the things we think about. Okay, if we're going to put in $10, $15 million over the next 3 to 5 years, what are we going to see for that? We're going to get a flip of the data card for the POC, proof of concept. Okay, it's working, yes or no. Some more money goes in, and so on and so forth. We want to make sure that all hangs together because there are always risks. It could take you longer from a CMC perspective, as Chef was saying. What if that clinical trial design isn't quite? You go to the FDA and they say, well, we're not quite sure about this. So there could be a number of elements that cause a delay. The whole thing has to fit together. Back to my earlier comment, that's where it's a test, and the good teams figure these things out.
No, I think that's an excellent point, and I don't want to take anything from the other panelists, but one thing I would definitely say is contingency plans is something critical for our evaluation process. What if X or Y doesn't work out? And we're very focused on the assumptions of any model. So when we look at the plan, we're looking at what are the assumptions that will go into X and go into Y. And if this doesn't work out, what's your plan B and plan C? And in the event that there isn't a plan B and plan C, then we tend to ask these companies to come back once they've thought through plan B and plan C and let's revisit the issue. Please, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Sure, no, I think, I agree with everything that's been said. I think, the plan survives as long as you make first contact with the enemy, and then you're improvising. On the other hand, we all love it when a plan comes together, right? So it's, I think it's, we look at roughly 1,000 opportunities every year across our 5 therapeutic areas, across stages. So, when we look at search evaluation, I think we look through this in tiered ways, right? I think the strategic fit obviously is key. So we spend a lot of time actually internally trying to define on an annual basis what our portfolio construction should look like. What do we want to do externally? Where are the holes? What can we do internally? Who are the best players? Does it make sense to even engage in a certain area, given where the competition is at? So when we see an opportunity, it's really very simplistic. The first 4 things we look at beyond strategic fit really is how solid is the science. Can we test this mechanistically in humans, ideally in a phase 1b study where we're not after clinical outcomes but after biology engagement and proof of mechanism studies for a normal therapeutic. What does the regulatory, manufacturing, actually translatability from early to later stage clinical aspects look like? And then frankly, are we operating in an area and on a timeline which fits serving a need, right, in the marketplace, which hopefully we have predefined around the target product profile in our portfolio construction discussions. So I think simplistically, that's how we look at it. Out of and applying those measures, out of the 1,000 opportunities, I would say 70-75% of the opportunity are an immediate no, right? For a number of reasons. That's not to say we're not constructive in our feedback and send you on your way and ask you to come back once you have certain data points. There's probably around 5, maybe 8% of opportunities where we are really excited that we want to move into a due diligence process and really hopefully towards a transaction very quickly. But the interesting ones are the ones in between, right? So the 10 to 25% of opportunities where there might be some intriguing data, some intriguing science, might be a interesting clinical path, but there's holes in the holes you have to plug. And I think that is really where the relationship comes in. Can we work with these teams and find a good way that is efficient, agile, nimble, for both parties of finding a path forward, right? And I think the good companies, and you see that in ultimately their deal making, how successful they've been, is they're the ones who engage with the partners in working to generate the missing data, right? The alternative is you send them on your way and say, come back when you have the data, right? We try to work with the companies wherever we can for those where we're intrigued yet we're not yet convinced that we want to move forward.
So there's a lot that's been said today that I would absolutely support in terms of what Bayer looks at, particularly in licensing deals. We, full disclosure, we don't have a venture arm at Bayer, but what we do have is a program that we started about 3 or 4 years ago. It's called Leaps by Bayer. And it's a really interesting program where we do invest large amounts of capital in joint venture formation. And sort of getting to what Christian just said, a big part of how we choose our partner is based on, the relationship building. The first joint venture that we formed was with CRISPR Therapeutics, focused on gene editing technologies. And the company, or the joint venture that was formed, is Casebia Therapeutics. The goal there is to develop therapies to treat autoimmune disorders and hemostatic disorders. We've also, and I think the total deal value there was about $300 million on Bayer's part, whereas CRISPR brought their enabling IP. It's a 50-50 joint venture, and we have seats at the board level, so we have good oversight onto the business. It's an entirely separate company. We've done this model with a number of other partners. For example, Versant Ventures, we formed Blue Rock Therapeutics, which is focused on the development of pluripotent stem cells to treat disease, cardiovascular disease. And so I think that ultimately all of what my colleagues here on the panel have already outlined is important, regardless of whether you're looking at an in-licensing deal or investment into, for example, at Bayer, one of these joint ventures. But ultimately it comes down to also developing and nurturing the relationships, not just initially until the deal is signed, but throughout the relationship and throughout the development of either the asset that we in-license and or the joint venture that's formed.
Great. I want to progress a little bit now with respect to the question on due diligence. This is something that I've internally at our firm have taken a lot of heat on, that I expect a company when they come to present to us to have thought about the market access process and their strategic approach to that. And also as it relates to patient integration, patient engagement as well, even at the most earliest stages of the company's development. I'd be interested, and I apologize for being a little self-serving on this question though, but I'm always looking for validation from people smarter than me. I mean, as you four look at your own opportunities, I mean, Christian, you mentioned 1,000 opportunities in the past 12 months, how many of them have thought about those issues, market access, how they're going to think about pricing, the pharmacoeconomics of an opportunity, and then ultimately patient engagement? If a company does not come during the months of the dating process with a thoughtful process, how does that rest with you? Or are you, given the resources at Servier or Bayer, do you say, well, we've got these capabilities in-house, we'll work with this company and we'll leverage our resources on this? So I'd be curious of your thoughts on it, and then stepping back to the venture side, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'll take a first crack at this. I mean, obviously, again, it depends on stage, right? I think the phase 1B on your way to a proof of concept study or beyond, right? They naturally will have thought about this, and typically, it's relatively straightforward for us to do internal analysis, which we always do with our teams, and see where we align on that. I think for the earlier sides, in general, I think the earlier companies, and I think understandably so, haven't really thought about market, and the vast majority about market access strategy or pricing strategies or go-to-market strategies, right? And they necessarily shouldn't have. But I think what we, and I'll frame this as more of an allergic reaction. What we react allergically to is more the company that comes, well, you know, here's a $40 billion NASH market. You know, this is why we can tap, you know, 55% of that, you know, with our asset, which is 4 years from IND, given that there's, you know, 45 other MOAs in the market, right? So without a solid scientific foundation, having thought about how do you compare to the competition, you know, how do you really become best in class as opposed to first in class, I think that's what we probe on the earlier side, right? It's really about, you know, how has the company thought about it? Can we together think about, you know, can we test the biology or the science in humans in a way that allows us to, you know, measure target engagement, get a dose response, ideally predict which patients we should segment for and enrich for in the trials, right? I think those are the earlier and the more important conversations, right? That being said, you know, we do take a look early on at the competitive environment, right? So we don't need to be, you know, 5th or 6th or 7th in line with a kinase inhibitor in oncology. So, you know, it depends a lot on where the macro environment is at as well.
Correct.
Yeah, that was actually, I was chuckling when you said that, because I think one of the things that the statement that you made around what puts you off with drug early stage companies is that, you know, sometimes there's a sort of naivete. You get sort of fixed into this idea that you can tap into a certain market. And I think particularly with early stage companies, and that's been more my experience in working with Bayer's, working with early stage assets and early stage companies, is that we don't expect that you would have a clear idea of what the market access is, et cetera. We can do that, and we will do that, and we will look at it from a holistic perspective, because oftentimes, even if there are areas that would make a lot of sense as an entry, you know, that might make sense as an entry, but then there may be other areas that would be more interesting to us from either a strategic perspective and or from a total market size perspective. So I think it really depends on the stage of the asset. You know, by the same token, if we're talking about something that's already ready to go into phase 1 and preparing for proof of concept, then certainly you should have a clear idea of where you want to go with that and good arguments for that and the data to support that. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. And maybe Brent, you can give your perspective given the number of companies. And by the way, just out of curiosity, how many companies did you look at across all of Caney Ventures, you know, in 2018 approximately? We won't hold you to an exact number, but
I'm sure it's tens of thousands. I don't know, because I'm sure I saw a couple thousand myself.
okay. So we'll just say, make the math easy. So of the 1,000 that you may have really thought, okay, I'll spend more than 5 minutes on or 10 minutes on. I'm being facetious there, but of those that you spend a little more time on, what percentage of that 1,000 would you say you actually? And I can tell you from my standpoint what I experienced. What percentage of those companies did you actually take to full due diligence, possibly a term sheet pending due diligence?
A handful.
Yeah,
I did one investment last year.
So we looked
My
at.
family says, "What the hell do you do with your time?"
We looked at 380, took 5 to due diligence, and invested in 2.
Okay.
So actually 3 because it closed in December.
That's a very steep call. Market access planning, patient insights and data, I would agree with what Lisa and Christian have said. I think it clearly depends on where are you relative to a presumed launch, relative to getting in the clinic, those kinds of things. So in some respects, kind of goes proportionally. Even at an early stage, however, a couple of simple things we take a look at. You tell me, okay, how big is the market? There are X patients, I can command this kind of a price for it. I'm going to assume that for the most part, any of our little companies is a price taker of the market for that widget that they sell, that drug that they sell. Markets are pretty well defined, and an example top of mind, we've been involved with 7 antibiotic companies over the past 15, 20 years. And we show up, we've got this great new therapy, and we're going to charge a price X. No, there's an absolute ceiling on what you can charge for these things. Unlike oncology drugs, where it seems like the prices continue to go up. Antibiotics, you're absolutely capped. But if I come up with a new oncology drug, it's going to be, well, it's going to be close to something she has or he has or others have. And so they're going to be natural price points that just evolve. And so in that respect, it's easier. So you can do simple math that says price times quantity, price is this much per patient per year, whatever. Here's how many patients I'm going to get. To Christian's point, you're not going to get all of them. And so you do some pretty quick and simple math there. 15 minutes up? Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm in the middle of the crowd here.
Good.
But it is a more important issue as you march further along. Subtle things that matter, this was alluded to a few minutes ago. I think about enriching the patient population. I've got a population of patients defined as X, and you're going to enroll them in a clinical trial, and you start thinking about, well, if there's a way to make sure I have higher success in my clinical trial, what can I do? If I just say I'm going to pick something simplistic, brain cancer patients, well, what does that mean? And so if you can titrate that, get that much crisper, if there's a defined genetic definition of these patients, doesn't mean you're going to win, but you can therefore select really well. I think that's been a hallmark of success of some of the third rock companies, is they look for a specific genetic signature, and if it doesn't fit, that they've got such tight blinders on, they're not going to do it. That could be good or bad, but I think it's been a very successful model for them in that regard. Let me just comment the other side of my mouth, since I look at medical device companies as well. Patient access, pathway to the market, getting reimbursement is job one, day one in all device companies. Typically selling into a hospital or a clinic, ASC, something like that, those companies have to think from day one about that path. Oftentimes because our small companies need to do the initial commercialization efforts. We've had one company out of 120 or so in our biotech portfolio where we said, let's invest in the commercial infrastructure and let's go sell a drug. Otherwise, we're selling it up the food chain. We're feeding the machine, as one of my partners likes to say. We're long gone before these products are ever commercialized by 5, 8, 10 years, and they don't all work. Whereas device companies, in almost all cases, need to go execute in the market, which means from day one they're thinking about getting a CPT code and everything that goes with that for some new technology. They don't tend to fit into existing slipstreams all that well because it's a new thing. And so does the hospital get paid? Does the doctor get paid for her or his services? There's a whole ball of wax that needs to be thought of from day one.
And Chef, we'll close things out and open up for questions after your comments.
For us, patient engagement is important. So if you look at from a development perspective, but also from what the patients really need, and that's also a characteristic, perhaps more of the orphan drug field. So in the plans there should have been already like real some patient engagement, patient involvement in the clinical studies, the way study planning are critical. I think everything else has been said, and I think that's something that I can add to the discussion.
Great. With what time we have left, I wanted to open up for questions that anyone might have. I've got a whole series of questions I can ask, but I'd rather hear from you all. Sir?
So in terms of you're saying you're long gone before it's for therapeutic, you're long gone before it's marketed, what's your preferred stage for looking it over to the future?
We prefer things that are preclinical. By, as I said before, 12 to 36 months is pretty typical. We've had, maybe this is a phenomena of the markets being so good, meaning public markets, but a lot of M&A activity. Even though we're investing early in the life of the company, and early relative to a launch, our typical investment from that first check going in until the company goes public or it's sold is about 4 years. Dramatically, it's stunning to think how fast that is. And yet it's still, many, many years before going into the marketplace as a commercial product.
Anyone else?
Can I flip that question and ask what's your preference for buying?
Well, I think, again, I think it comes back to, where are our needs, right? I think if we have a sense of our portfolio construction, I think we tend to proactively go out and seek the things we need, right? So we buy really all across the value chain. I think, last year, I mean, we've done a lot of, extracting academic innovation, directly through tech transfer offices, but also we've also done, large-scale M&A by the Shire Oncology acquisition. So it really depends where the need is.
Yes, yeah, same for Bayer. I think, phase 3, phase 2, phase 3 assets are nice to have, but they're so competitive and there's not that many out there. So we seem to be looking more early stage or for licensing, IND, pre-IND, phase 1 stage. Although last year we did, or 2 years ago, we did license from Loxo, a compound that was already completed phase 3 trials, but that's pretty unusual.
I'm sorry, there was a question back there.
Hi. Christopher particularly mentioned some additional research around the mechanism of a drug, even at the early stage. And I just want to understand from all of you the logic behind that. There are a lot of times there are drugs that work beautifully and are safe and tolerable, but you don't really understand the mechanism. And I don't think that the FDA necessarily is as particular about the mechanism as opposed to the safety. So can you just elaborate a little bit on kind of the rationale and what you need to see there?
Yeah, no, sure. So there's two things, right? I think what I meant was, can we mechanistically study what this drug does in humans, right? In other words, can we find an engagement marker for the biology before, we engage in clinical outcomes? I mean, functional clinical outcomes, if they go well, they're great, right? If they don't go well and you're flying blind, it's hard to see what you're supposed to do better. So do we, in all cases, need to know the exact target? No, but we need to, at the very minimum, have some type of biomarker strategy that allows us to tie target engagement and dose response to engagement of the biology, which mechanistically is driving what we're trying to achieve. Right? Now, that being said, if we tend to see, particularly over the last 2-3 years, I think, I don't know how you guys felt, but we tend to see an awful lot of phenotypic screens again. I mean, there's been a real resurgence in phenotypic screening. And in those cases, I think we would, require at least some effort for target deconvolution, because ultimately, as we go into IND-enabling tox studies, right, again, if you don't know the target, it just makes it much, much harder. But my main point really was about trying to assess mechanism and biology in the clinic.
I mean, at Bayer, we've done phenotypic studies as well, but we will not advance a compound if we don't know the target. We just don't have that risk tolerance. So.
And that's the same for us. I mean, thinking about the management team itself, if we are entrusting them to be stewards of this entire endeavor, if they can't explain why something works to the most basic level of the science, it causes us concern as to whether or not we have the right person behind the wheel there. And if we can't explain it, then we try to, unfortunately, think about it 5 years out, 10 years out, when it is in humans, and there are adverse side effects in it. How do we explain those? How do we anticipate those? And we may be, as Brent said, out of it at that particular time, but we still feel a moral responsibility that we're bringing good products to market or supporting the commercialization of those good products. And if this becomes strictly a financial endeavor for us, then maybe I need to switch careers.
To me, it's not that critical. I echo what people are saying, that you need to understand, you need to have the story ready, you need to understand it, but really to have this is the target, and this is how it's engaged, and this is how that target looks in the disease. To really fully understand that, I don't think it's really necessary if you have a good functional outcome, and if you have a PD marker that can be studied, and then that's fine. And going back, because obviously, if you look at the pharmaceutical industry, they went to the highest specificity, of drugs. Drugs should work only on one target, very specific, very selective, and it hasn't brought much either. So both in safety as in efficacy. Corticosteroids are hard to beat drugs. So it's so I just want to get a bit of that point across.
So we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Otherwise, we'll be outside. You can grab us.
So as you guys scope out opportunities, what are the red flags that keep on coming up that, early stage people like me never really understood? What are the things that we don't understand that you keep on seeing and saying, no?
I won't jump the gun here, but this is something as early as 7:30 this morning. So this is real time, we'll say. When we ask for a use of proceeds analysis or an understanding of how the proceeds of a Series A or Series B are going to be used, this is not a hypothetical. We want to have a clear understanding of the utilization of that capital. Because understand, this is not our money we're spending. We have been entrusted by another party to be good stewards of their money. So we're asking you to be just as responsible as we are with the use of those proceeds. And if people cannot truly understand and delineate what are the economics of an opportunity, I have to be honest with you, I have seen some outstanding science out of the Broad, out of the Koch Institute, and we're based in Boston, so we get the pleasure of having some very cool things come out of those institutions. But the complete and total disregard for the economics, or the complete and total disregard for what is required to run a business, those types of things we have little patience for. And that's, literally, and now, 7:30 this morning, we were looking at a $50 million Series A, and things were kind of sketchy. And we just want to make sure that when we say 50 million, we're not talking 65, we're talking 50.
I think if science aside, if the science is all above board and makes sense, I think for us at Bayer, it has to be something that's within our strategic focus. And then if it is, then one of the things that we always are looking at is it first in class or is it best in class? And then it has to compete with our internal portfolio, because we've got projects going on, internally. So there's a lot of things to consider in terms of whether to invest, whether it's licensing in an asset, say that you have in your company, versus going with something that we already have in house that may be more advanced, that may actually be first in class, or it just really depends. But there's a lot there that we have to consider in terms of whether to pursue something with a partner.
So to me, in general, repellent from people coming up to me is people who keep coming on how great it is that they have. So you need to be able to explain the risks, how you how you have thought about those risks, because in any project there are downsides and risks, and you must be able to explain that as well, and not only talk about the great things. So it needs to have responsibility and transparency, and that you need that, because basically, certainly for us, you're going on a trajectory where you're working together, and so that's, I think, perhaps a bit on a personal level, but also in the way that you present your story.
I'll build on that a little bit. And my words are EQ. I'm sure everybody has heard that simple expression before. Things like there's a continuum in many things in life. Annoyance and persistence. The entrepreneur who's there, keeps it in front of me versus, did you get my email? Did you get my email? Did you get my email? It's like my 10-year-old sometimes. Yes, I heard it the first 15 times. Thank you. And I say that jokingly, but that happens not infrequently. Because I'm trying to talk to 50 other entrepreneurs. That's how it goes. Never feel sorry for VCs, by the way, because we do something that's really fun and interesting. But
Don't worry, we got it.
okay, good, thank you. There's more validation for me. But that is a specific example. So EQ, I can think of a couple of CEOs in the past where things didn't quite work out as we had hoped, in part because they were browbeating strategics saying, don't you get it? This is the greatest company in the world. And the strategics are like, apparently you don't get it because I've got the checkbook. It makes a big difference. Last comment I'll make, this was a CEO conference we had years ago, a panel like this, I wasn't a part of it. Some esteemed people up there, and a guy who's CEO in the crowd raised his hand and he said, you know, being a CEO is really interesting, fun job, you have lots of power, blah, 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 blah. What keeps you humble? One of the guys looked to the left, looked to the right, and he said, do you have a wife? So look for, you know, whatever keeps you humble, whatever kind of keeps you grounded is something that I think about in my own life as well.
Thank you all. Oh,
Let me just
please,
make one
please,
comment.
please.
So first, so your 10-year-old still writes emails? No, so no, I would say, you know, it's any potential partnership, right? It's a relationship, right? So I think, you know, for us, what we're really after is a conversation and ability to listen, right? I think we have a responsibility to be responsive, to give constructive feedback. You know, we'd like to be in your shoes or the other party's shoes and envision, you know, what life is like. And on the other hand, I think we expect, you know, if we take the time, right, and we bring in, you know, certain key senior people or larger teams, you know, at the company at a comprehensive level, that is a certain cost to the company, right? So I think there is an output from that conversation. I think, you know, as we you know, reapproach and have more and more conversations, I think our hope is that we can build up on the previous conversation. So I think an inability to listen is really something that, you know, we react quite allergically to.
Well, thank you, all of you, for participating today. We'll be outside if there's any other questions, but please help me.